Winds of Exchange has been out in America for a while now, and during that time I've gotten to play hundreds of games with it, both within set and cross set, playing solo against myself and in large scale tournaments. And now that I've been so exposed to it, I want to share my thoughts on the set with you guys. Honestly, I think WoW may be passing Mass Mutation as my new favorite set to play with. I've been having so much fun with it, it's flashy and bursty and can be incredibly powerful, and it has such a unique feel compared to every set before it. Without further ado, let's get into it. To begin with, I wanted to bring up a few cards that have really stuck out to me as I've played. The first one is Hallowfest. This card is just ridiculous, definitely one of the strongest in the set. It represents up to 4 creatures in a single action card, and 4 very powerful creatures at that. It reads, play, search your deck and discard pile for up to 4 break-in cards with different names. Reveal those cards and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck. Gain chains equal to the number of cards put into your hand this way. Now the 4 members of the Brobnar Break-In Band, in case you are unaware, are Brick Nasty, Volka, Gedhammer, and Harmalatoon. Brick provides Ember Generation, Volka provides Splash Attack, Ged Ready Stuff, and Harmalatoon, the scariest of the bunch, puts destroyed friendly Brobnar creatures back into your hand instead of the discard pile, which means he's the first one the opponent needs to deal with, otherwise the band will never truly die. And Hallowfest can get all 4 of these witch level threats onto the board at once. Turn 1, it can lead to some pretty cheap and easy wins if the opponent doesn't have multiple sources of immediate board control in hand. The chains are easily worth the massive sudden board presence. Some decks even have multiple bricks or even multiple Harmalatoons, which is simply absurd. And with all the ready and fight effects that are in Brobnar this set, like Might Club and Shock Herder, it's not hard to get some instant value out of these creatures once you play them. Hallowfest is easily a top 5 WoW card for me. Another phenomenal Brobnar card is Rant and Rive, causing the opponent to lose half their Ember if they have 8 or more in their pool. It's one of the only sources of scaling Ember control in the set outside of Martyr of the Vault, who's much more finicky to work with. It's something the opponent always needs to be cognizant of, keeping them from bursting too high lest they get hit with it. Its power is also heightened by the fact that Brobnar has other good Ember control cards that can stop the opponent even if they check at 7 to avoid the R&R, such as Ragnarok Prep or multiple copies of Berserker Slam and or Bumpsy. Other houses have this as well, seen in cards like Request Donations or Generous Offer, so you can come back to Brobnar on a later turn and hopefully hit them with it then. It's like the new Graft or TMTP, though not quite as potent in the same way those ones are. Rant and Rive is a very important card in Brobnar's arsenal, or even WoW's arsenal as a whole. Scoop Up is a card in Mars I've been quite impressed with as well. It's a card that shows up at common and can abduct enemy creatures, and I believe at least one copy will always show up if you have Memrox the Red in your deck, the perfect combo piece to reward you for your abduction. Scoop Up can bypass destroyed effects, which is a super important feature. You can archive a relatively useless creature from your own side and a critical creature from theirs. Or another use I've gotten out of it is archiving a useless creature from their side and an important card from my side that may have gotten tokenized. Say my Hallowfest got tokenized, made into a Raider. I could scoop it up into my archives alongside a crappy enemy creature, so when I do eventually pull up my archives, Hallowfest ends up back in my hand while a useless card ends up back in theirs. Scoop Up is a versatile and powerful piece of board control, and I'm always happy to see it in my decks. Another Mars card I've grown to love is Zizok. He has Skirmish and Splash Attack 1, and when an enemy creature is destroyed by his Splash Attack damage, he readies. In my experience, Zizok is able to just decimate battle lines, readying and fighting 4 or 5 times in a single turn to utterly mutilate the opponent's board. He's even great for setting up things like Mars Needs Ember or more destructive Ammonia Clouds. And if you're able to throw something like a Grey Augur next to him, or upgrade him with Pyro, his power is enhanced even more. I love Zizok, definitely one of my favorite new Mars creatures. Now let's move on to some broader topics. In terms of the house selection in this set, I feel like Brobnar is a contender for one of the top Winds of Exchange factions. Unfathomable is up there as well. The amount of disruption they have is incredible, almost on a similar level to what we've seen from House Dis in the past. The fact that Befuddle, Abyssal Sight, Illusions of Grandeur, and Plunder all exist in the same house in the same set at varying levels of rarity is insane to me, and I love it. As for a third top house to go alongside Brobnar and Unfathomable, it's a tough call for me. Equidon is a real powerhouse with the right cards. They have massive burst potential with things like Mass Buyout, and a great variety of Ember control as well. A house that really surprised me in terms of their power was actually Sanctum. When I was first opening WoW decks, I wasn't particularly fond of them, especially because of dud cards like Revered Monk, but the more I've played with them and gotten to know them, I've actually come to really appreciate what they can offer. They have amazing Ember control, Outflank being one of my favorite of their cards, and they can easily produce a massive, taunted, armored battle line that's not easy for your opponent to handle. Shal, Almsmaster, Pandulf, and Colonel Mariana are big and beefy, with taunt that can capture and enrage. The terrifying Baldric was reprinted, Grey Abyss provides some extra armor to tokens, and the Grey Rider returns as well, enabling some pretty fantastic instant fight abilities and house cheating capability. And Membership Drive is just iconic at this point. A favorite combo of mine that I recently discovered is Zephon the Opulent with Light Everlasting. Make 2 tokens when you play it the first time, then when it dies, play it again later with Light Everlasting. I have this combo in an Emberling deck, enabling some pretty good Emberling generation. He's even better with Night Bolt, which I sadly don't have in that deck. But the point is, Sanctum has so many excellent tools that it makes for the perfect support house. Even its tokens aren't too bad, outside of Disciple who's pretty crappy. Cleric in particular can be super annoying to play against, and the other two, Defender and Squire, are nice bodies on the board offering armor or taunt. Another house I've really been enjoying is House Mars. A lot of Mars pods are absolutely oppressive to play against, especially if they have a Mars token to complement them. Rebel, while it looks pretty pathetic on paper, is truly a force to be reckoned with the proper cards to back it up, such as Iron X Banner and Iron X Rebel. Iron X Rebel is truly a cornerstone card for Mars, enabling ridiculous amounts of burst and combo potential. Being able to drop cards like Mesmerist or Harvester, or even Rebels like I just mentioned, and instantly use them with Iron X Rebel is so powerful. Mars has an abundance of ways to set up for their classic Mars needs Ember action, and having the ability to spam out Mars tokens with things like Nyan Outpost, Vatminder, and Blorb can make for devastating hypnotic commands or psychic networks. I personally have found that decks with Mars usually really want a Mars token to go along with them, otherwise it can make those pods fall flat a little. Mix the Tall-Minded with only 2 other Mars creatures to go with it isn't nearly as strong as it would be with 6 other grunts on the table alongside it. So in my experience, Brobnar, Unfathomable, Equidon, Sanctum, and Mars are all really strong houses, and each offer massive potential. Brobnar and the Fish House are my top 2 so far, but the other 3 aren't far behind. Star Alliance and Saurian are the only 2 houses I'm not that sold on yet. Saurian is really just a machine that generates Ember for the opponent. On DOK, whenever Saurian is present in a deck, the Ember control stat gets absolutely shot, sometimes even dipping down into the negatives. So many cards exalt, with so few ways to do anything meaningful with that exalted Ember, outside of things like Epic Poem or Senator Brachus. I've only seen a few Saurian pods I've been impressed with, and they usually either have multiple copies of Epic Poem or have something to do with Legionary Trainer and Scholar, which can actually be very strong. But more often than not, Saurian is really lacking. Same goes for Star Alliance much of the time. Except for Emberling, their tokens are extremely lackluster and generally ranked pretty low, and they have too many dead cards at common, such as Pyro and Friendly Guide. Nurse Toto is mid as always, Camaraderie is inconsistent, and the creature upgrade hybrids are cards I definitely did not need to see reprinted. They are, however, one of the only houses in the set that can consistently archive, with things like Recorded History and Ganymede Outpost, and with the overall lack of efficiency in this set, those cards can actually be really valuable. They also have some pretty great board control, with Red Alert and Selective Preservation being reprinted, and Quintrino Warp really shining for its first appearance. I mean, just like any house in this set, it has some cool and unique ways to really stand out and do some crazy things, and others of their cards are really solid like Gruntwork and Rogue Operation, but they just don't quite live up to what other houses can bring in my opinion. So, I currently have a few separate solo tournaments in progress with my WoW decks. I'm making sure to get in at least a few games with every WoW deck I open, and so far I believe one of the biggest defining aspects of Winds of Exchange is just how fast it is. It is insanely bursty. Every house has some way to go from 0 to 100 in an instant, and it's usually board-based burst in one way or another, whether you're reaping out with those 6 token creatures you just generated, or playing a membership drive to reward you for having generated them. I really appreciate that sort of speed, and the fact that every house for the most part has cool things it can do in that regard. The one thing the set does lack to a degree is scaling Ember control. Like Mass Mutation, which really only had Effervescent Principle, WoW's best scaling cards are Rant and Rive, which was previously mentioned, and Martyr of the Vault, which is pretty finicky. It tries to be the new Gatekeeper or Doorstep to Heaven, but is much harder to time or pull off without the right support cards like Nidapult or Martyr's End. Closed Door Negotiation can potentially steal a lot of Ember, but at the costly price of letting your opponent draw cards. There are also cards that can hard stop keys like Timoti the Damned, but the rest of the Ember control is typically on a much smaller level. Another interesting thing is that WoW has very few key cheats. It only has 3, Token of Appreciation, Blorb Hive, and the Anomaly Ectocharge, which will appear in the next set, Grim Reminders, as an actual card. Anyway, compare that to a set like Age of Ascension, which had 8 total key cheats. 3 doesn't feel like a whole lot. Honestly, I don't mind the lack of key cheats, and I think they're themed well with the set, very board-based. The Equidon one relies on how many tokens you have, while Blorb Hive does the same thing in its own special way with its linked token Blorb. Something else I've noticed while playing all these games is the danger of tokenization. From the very beginning, I think we all knew that the process of tokenization would be a risky one, since creating a token creature takes away the top card of your deck. What if that card is something important, like board control or Ember control? Sure enough, it happens plenty often that you'll tokenize something valuable. In fact, now that I have a better feel for the set, much of the time I'll discard my token making cards, especially those common ones like Chiron or Teamwork. In the case of something like Longsword Elector, where I have the option of making one, I'll choose not to. If I know I have something important coming up like Hallowfest or Rogue Operation, I'll hold off on making tokens until it's safely in my hand. It's not worth losing my Hallowfest for a couple tiny cadets. Now, there are times I've found when it may be worth it to make tokens haphazardly and not care about what those tokens may be made of. If I'm setting up for a big membership drive, I'll spam out as many tokens as possible beforehand whether they end up being valuable cards or not. I just want that huge burst. Or if the opponent is at check and I need to take them off their key, I'll play my request donations despite any potential risk. Or sometimes the opponent doesn't have any board control in their deck, so the ability to spam out a big board of tokens can be extremely problematic for them. Like with any game of KeyForge, the circumstances vary, but I think learning when to play token makers and when to hold off is a very important skill for this set. Most tokens are tiny and don't do much, and if they don't help or synergize with your deck very well, they're rarely worth losing good cards to just for the sake of making them. That's why cards like Gruntwork and Future Booster or anything that allows you to archive can be so important. They give you more information and can help negate at least a little of the risk involved in tokenizing. Winds of Exchange is known as a very inconsistent and high roller KeyForge set, so any amount of additional consistency you can find in your deck is often very useful. But that'll do it for today's video. Overall, Winds of Exchange is probably my new favorite set up to date. It's full of ultra powerful cards, it's fast, every game of it is vastly different, and the token mechanic has been tons of fun to learn and enjoy. Let me know what you guys think of the set in the comments below, now that it's been out for a good while, at least here in America. Thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you all again in the next one. See you later.